Welcome to Shakespeare in Transition, presented by the Hudson Area Library, my local library, with support from Create Council, which is Create Council on the Arts, which supports artists in Columbia County and in the Catskills. And I am super excited to be having this conversation with Charlene. Charlene, I say Adiambo.
Atiambo, with like a TH
Adiambo.
sound. Atiambo, yeah.
Atiambo, yes. And then Nisi Aya. And I want to read their bios because bios are important. Charlene Adiambo is a Kenyan-American playwright, musician, and director raised in Atlanta and based in Harlem. She is an MFA candidate in playwriting at Columbia University, where she has the Hansberry Lilly Fellow. They are a 2026 finalist for the Crossword Genesis Award for Excellence in Playwriting and a 2026 season finalist for the Downtown Urban Arts Festival, a 2025 June Bingham New Playwright Commission finalist, and a semifinalist for the Hearth Theater's 2023 virtual retreat. They're receiving support for their horror play Rot. She recently premiered her new punk rock musical, Lily Sis, The Furies, at Columbia University. And I happened to see a bunch of really cool clips from that, and it looked so cool. And as a Fury Greek goddess and Greek mythology babe as well, I was like, I gotta see this, I really wanna see it. So I can't wait for it to come back. Claps and snaps for Charlene. And then, thank you everyone. And then I would also like to welcome Nisi. Nisi Aya is a Black femme from the Bronx. Nisi uses she, ze, and we pronouns. She and all her younger selves tell stories and tall tales while helping others do the same. As a cultural worker, writer, we believe in the transformative nature of storytelling, rehearsing revolution, quiet, world ending, and otherwise, and examining how we move forward, shape new words, this world through healing justice, Afrofuturist frameworks, and tenderness, intimacy, practices of feeling good. Our creative work reflects those notions while exploring the lines between oral history, archives, and memory, detailing both the absence and presence of love, and giving all the life and then some to Black femmes. Nisi's work has been supported and developed by the Playwright Center, Venturous Theater Fund, Berkeley Rep, the Public Theater, Breaking the Binary Theater, New York Theater Workshop, Space on Writer Farm, Hermitage Artist Retreat, and the Limbada Literary, to name a few. Claps for Nisi. Yes, I'm very grateful to have these incredible artists here. And I am Janelle. It's like there's double things happening. I'm Janelle. I also go by Jay. I use they, them pronouns. I am a storyteller by trade. I do storytelling with poetry, with words, with prose, with movement, with sound. I also could go down, I think it's really important to say your whole bio, but I also really want to hear from these two people. So I'm gonna move through and I'll share my bio with you at the end. So beautiful. So I am writing this play, or I guess I've written it now, called Rosalind and Juliet, which is a prequel to Romeo and Juliet. And in doing this, I did a deep dive, even though I'm a theater babe, into Shakespeare. And I've always been a little on the outside, the depth of the language, the presentation of it had never really immediately grasped me. I think I accidentally read The Merchant of Venice in 9th grade as my first Shakespeare piece and was just like, this is so cool. And then I saw it and I was just like, this is really long. This is a really long process to get through information. And so I've had this back and forth relationship with Shakespeare. And so I decided to start us off with because there are people in the room also who may know, who is William Shakespeare to you? Anybody? The Bard.
Every man's stories, Kind of a mystery. Who is he? Is it Elizabeth? Is it some other unnamed person?
Right. Any other feelings? For some people, he's their first theater teacher, right? Some children get Romeo and Juliet before they've even made it to 6th grade, right? He becomes an introduction, or he stands for a level of like classical theater in a way. And also, he was around 1564 to 1616. He was an actor. He was a playwright. He was a poet. He was also an artistic director for a period of time. He wrote 37, he approximately, right, wrote 37 plays, but 154 sonnets. And there's even sort of some doubt around that as well. Like, did he really write all of those? Did he write more of them and we just don't have them? Interesting conversation. He's also like the world's first, what did I call him? Squatter. Does everyone know that story about him? About how his theater company was just like, this is our theater now, even though the state owned it. And so they were like, what do you own? What do you actually put into this space besides what we do by putting people in the seats? And they were like, the beams. And so the theater company went in and ripped out the beams and all of the like wood panels of this theater and then like re-put in theirs. And they were like, great, now it's ours. And then they got to keep it. So, you know, if you're thinking about like radical ways to just say, this is how I continue to make my art, he was one of those first people that was just like, I don't care that you're not going to give me the space, I'm going to take it. Okay, great. Any questions, any thoughts so far? So I wanted to start with disrupting structures. I really feel like when I am looking at a Shakespearean piece, I'm really thinking about the structure of it, right? And so we have Othello, which is sort of rigid. It's got a military structure. It's about chain of command and obedience, right? You have Romeo and Juliet, which is about timelines, deadlines, misunderstandings, and a binary division, right? The Montagues versus the Capulets. You have Titus, which is about like revenge and how you can get really caught up in the act of revenge and the cycles that kind of keep going when we think about our political powers constantly engaging into war. And then the Tempest, which is like master versus slave or master and slave and how those two things play with each other. And so most of the structures, if I break them down, have to do with a level of royalty, which we can also call politics, alien or othering of people or a person, and like a historical content, right? Things that are really happening. And the other thing that I was really thinking about when I was trying to dive through what makes a Shakespearean piece what it is that he uses time and place to build the structure. So when we're talking about building Verona, the reason that we didn't see Moors at the time where we would have in Romeo and Juliet is because the Moor people were further down in like, I think it's called Pasadena maybe, a different part of Italy where they truly were already taking over land, right? So we don't see any person of color in Romeo and Juliet because there already was this war happening at that time. This historical context that keeps, we're like, why aren't there black people in it? And actually, they're not black people in it because the thought of Italians had for more people who were people who could have been considered what we think of black people was that they were invading at the time. And so he didn't touch on that. And it's also why when we look at Aaron in Titus Andronicus, that Aaron is deeply about war, deeply about revenge, deeply about making all of these ties, because again, at that time, the Italians were looking at the Moor people as people who were conquering land and people who they were fighting against. So I am moving in beautiful speed. Charlene, you're coming up. I'm really curious. We're gonna talk about royal lineages for a hot second. When we cast Black and Indigenous people to portray Shakespearean characters who are normally white and royal characters, we're allowing for a type of mobility that would not be at that time, right? Not even just thinking about our current racial dynamics, it just would not, you wouldn't see a person in that space in Rome, right? Or in Italy. And so we also want to think about the othering of the alien aspect of royalty. Why Othello was constantly fighting to find his place. And he says this line, I fetch my life and being from men of royal siege, which is this proclamation or this antiquating of, I only exist in the position of power that I have right now because of people who have royal power have put me there. I would not naturally be able to step into this role. And then we also think about it with Aaron, where he knows that his child, his bastard child, as they say, because they were going to murder him, is of royal lineage. So he says, this child is royal. You cannot murder this child, murder me instead. And they do. They follow this very strict idea about what royal lineage means, even in the moments where they don't. Again, we would not have seen Othello just naturally step into a position of power, but now we have a child of a Moor and a queen, basically, that has to live because of her power, because of her power, her royal power. So my first question is for Charlene. And Nissy, you also can answer it too. I meant to go through some Zoom protocols, which are, if you're not speaking, stay on mute. And if you have an answer, even though you're not being directly asked, feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll circle back to it. So Nissy, if you also have an answer, you can drop it in the chat. But my first question, and same here now outside of the Zoom world, if you have a response to this, after Charlene answers, or if you want to respond with Charlene what she's saying, just raise your hand and I'll point or gesture to you with my open hand. Charlene, hi.
Thank you for having me. There's so much between your work and mine. I'm just excited to find that there's a lot of things I think that we're thinking about similarly. So for me, when I saw this question, I thought about the ways that I've adapted Shakespeare or been in conversation. So for example, I've written a play about minstrelsy, and during a minstrel show, there's a show within a show. And in that show within a show, that's about this fake Southern, fantasy, racist fantasy. I also satirize Othello and Aaron, because I'm talking a lot about blackface and what black masculinity, about miscegenation. And so I think that a lot of times when I think of Shakespeare and lineage structure, I think a lot about the lineage and structure of race and also sexuality. I've also thought of the Othello and Iago, their relationship there's something psychosexual about it, and dealing with racial fantasies and fears. And so I've kind of thought of that as well, also the ways that the other is often always kind of tied to, it's the stain comes up a lot, but also it's there's this thing about reproduction and bodies and being all these things that are about nativism, all these words I'm spilling, but that I think a lot about what the ways that even when you were saying that not Titus, but Othello is kind of about obedience and rules and structures. So I'm kind of thinking about even ways that that can relate to their intimate lives and what ways that they are structured because of the space that they're in and time that they're in.
Thank you. Did everyone hear that okay? Because I can also, okay, great. I love that. Any other thoughts on royal lineage now that you're thinking through? Because it's easy to be again, I'm going to root us in Romeo and Juliet because it's one of the most common ones. It's easier to be oh, there's a prince and the Capulets must have some kind of money or class, right? So it's easy to just put it out of our minds and think, oh, it's actually these two families fighting. But normal families would not be able to fight in the streets the way the Montagues and the Capulets got away with, right? They were straight up murdering people in the streets. So you have to think about what a level of royalty gets you to pass by, to abide by. And when thinking of Othello and Iago, when Othello is seen as a level of maybe not royalty, but has a level of power, how he moves through space in a way that infuriates Iago so much that Iago builds this whole plan to destroy the thing that he loves, right? Lineage is so tied to people's identity and what they can and can't have access to, even as it is today. Yeah? Any thoughts about lineage? Feelings, comments? I really appreciated Charlene also bringing up the othering of bodies and how women are made to be forced into marriage, or they have to, thinking of As You Like It, completely change their gender presentation so that they can move through the world in the way that they feel safe. And I think that when we're thinking about royalty, it didn't escape Juliet to need to be married off, right? Even though she was a level of royalty, it doesn't escape them, particularly because they have a woman or a woman gendered body. It just looks differently, or it just looks different. More thoughts, questions? No? Okay. My next thought is language and body. So thank you, Charlene, for being my great transition. There's so much gatekeeping of language in iambic pattern, iambic pattern, right? It's so much about balance of rhythmic syllabi and rhyme. And the ability to do that sometimes can take some people away from understanding the straight direct line, but also it's an intentional move because we see in thinking of the Tempest with the legacy of Caliban when I refer to the example of Shakespeare, thinking about how we hear, oh, I developed or I learned language through a master, through somebody of power, and how there is somehow a lack of a language of their own, right? There isn't a native tongue for a Moor person written in Shakespeare yet, right? If not, it's pidgin, it's broken English, or it's a level of English that is elevated, and it's only elevated because someone has taught them, someone has helped them assimilate into that positionality. So what I really appreciated about John Clarke in the example of Shakespeare is that he calls out how it's still rooted in this supremacy around if you speak this way, you are right, and if you speak this way, you are wrong. And if you are wrong, in order to gain power, in order to move up or to look like a civilized person, somebody who is, in our container that we have here, white, has to teach you a language and teach you this form of language to move forward, to develop, to be seen and respected in your world, in Shakespeare's world too. So I want to start with Charlene for this question, and then also want to hear from Nissi. When you think of the purpose of Shakespearean language, what layers it feels like it expresses, how do you think that adjusts or changes when the role is given, when a role that is typically a white cis person is given to a person of color and a queer trans person of color? Charlene?
Yes. I saw a Julius Caesar production where the director chose to have Julius Caesar be played by a Black woman and to have the Brutus character like a white non-binary person. And generally, I think it was like a predominantly white cast. And I think that, so I'm kind of keying more into like what the role changes. I don't have so much to say about I would love to see if you'd like to dig into that or dig into whatever I'm saying. But with this, like having this like Black woman, Caesar, and this white non-binary Brutus, there was a lot of kind of like the racial codes were kind of coming in the sense of like you have a Caesar that is not only reviled for her power, his power, but also the fact that he is different, even though it's not said. There's like kind of a dynamic that was set up of like a society that is like seeing this Caesar as like maybe like how dare she, how dare like how dare this woman have power. So I think that it kind of changes like power. It can change power dynamics or speak to power dynamics, make them more clear, deepen them.
Yeah, definitely. Nissi, did you want to add?
Yeah, and I couldn't say this before, but my name is an okie doke. It's not spelled phonetically. It's Nisi, like Niecy Nash.
Nisi!
Yes.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. I love talking about Shakespeare's language. I am a Landry girly. I love language so much, and I think one of the things, like you said, that we see with Shakespeare's language is that I'm at school, so sorry for the bells. Is that it sets the world, right? So we actually can track who belongs to what world within the language. Like you were saying, iambic pentameter really is what's held with the royalty, what's held with the royal class, with nobles, or those most aligned with that. So across many plays, we can see how if you talk in verse, you have more societal power. If you talk closer to prose, or if you talk in a little bit more of those imagined words that Shakespeare came up with, like we have so many colloquialisms from Shakespeare. Those colloquialisms really live with the common man or the common person. So that what I think is one of the biggest purpose of Shakespearean language. I think when we start to cast folks who are non-white in these roles, we actually see how those stratifications either get larger or smaller. And so it's less about the casting and more about the frames. So I'm adapting The Tempest right now, and one of the big ones that I'm looking at is A Tempest by M.A. Césaire. And so in doing the research on Tempest and A Tempest, The Tempest and A Tempest, we really see the ways in which Caliban is not only not given language, or he's being made to take on someone else's language. The language that he's holding on to actually sets him off as the monster, as the other, very much so. And even not even like other human, but actually very specifically, and some of the older folios tell us, specifically not English. So we can like stretch it out to the non-human, but like this is someone who will never be considered English, would never have the proximity to royal and access and power. And so when we cast folks who are not of that cis white, we are really seeing all the ways in which we may not have access and opportunity the same way that others do. I think it really calls into question how we talk about like post-colonial uses of Shakespeare, which is what like Césaire was doing with The Tempest. Like really, how do we track the operations of power and privilege and think about how the language has created these social hierarchies, how they're embedded in the world's making, and also how we may be able to break that, like we were saying, break the structure so we can actually envision a more just world that says those who do not have the access of language actually are worthy of everything that they are being dispossessed of.
Yes. Thank you, Nisi. Thank you. Actually, this reminds me of jumping back to Rosalind and Juliet. I have this invented character named Sabe, who is Rosalind's father. Hi, come in. And at the beginning of Act 2, Rosalind has just like been in all of these balls. She's been sitting through all of these spaces with the Capulets and dressed up. She goes back home to her father and she starts to speak in this verse, and her father's like, you don't speak like that in our house. You speak like we speak in this house. We don't need that. And there are these moments where then there's later this moment where Tybalt and Lord Capulet are having a conversation, and they're like, oh, let's talk like the Moors, which means to talk in prose. And when they say it, I have them using this like hillbilly-like accent. And I have that because I really want to make sure I'm being clear that language is a clear sign of class. And a clear sign of class in particularly this world is necessary to move through space. And if you are able to move through space with your royal power, then you can play at what the lower class does. It doesn't matter as long as you have what your royal tongue is. Does anybody else have any thoughts around like the language and the body? Like how then when we put a Black woman as Julius Caesar, what does it mean? What does it look like? How does that body stand in space when you see a woman standing on that stage in front of the people who are about to murder her? Like, what does it feel like? Do you feel a different level of anticipation? Do you feel a different level of sympathy, right? Like, can you build a sympathy because now it's a woman and not a man in that position? Any thoughts from folks who are in the room? Have you seen any gender or race switches of a Shakespearean piece? Yeah?
Romeo and Juliet was
Yeah.
casting. But I think also with women are seen as more sympathetic, and maybe the betrayal feels heightened, because she's doing things, she's conquering in a way that other people are jealous of.
Janelle, the sound cut out for us. Sorry to interrupt anyone.
Is it better? We were asking, actually this is for you, Charlene, thanks for letting us know that the sound cut out. We were asking if in that Julius Caesar rendition that you saw, was the wife also still a wife, or was she a man?
The wife was still a wife. So yeah, there was like the queering aspect of it too. And when you mentioned actually like Julius Caesar's killing, I remember that was super visceral for me. It was like, I thought they did it respectfully, but it's hard to see a mob of predominantly white people killing Black women.
Right, right. And so it really, the impact shifts but the messaging stays. And that's sort of what I think is sort of the looseness about it. It's like the messaging that you need to get from it, because whether it was a man or not, I still had a little sympathy for Julius Caesar. Just a little, because he's, but I'm still like, you don't need to go out that way. And now when I see it as a Black woman, or if I saw it as a Black woman, I would be like, oh my God, that's terrible. That's like it feels like a too much of a societal double cycle echo chamber back at me, And so the impact shifts too. And I think it maybe even grows or expands. And I'm just gonna check oh great. Folks are just letting me know that the sound checked out in the chat. Okay, any more thoughts, Bob? Bob?
Yes, thank you. I was just going to say that I think Shakespeare lends itself to these conversations, and so casting is entirely different than if you were going to take another play or another writer. There's the social backdrop is always there with Shakespeare, so then the main characters can kind of be like whoever you want. I think the challenge is to then take the character and fully evolve it, so that you actually, like what you're saying, put a power woman in that role as king or queen. How do you push that? So all the variations of Shakespeare that we've seen, I think that's the exciting part. That is the puzzle. That is what makes Shakespeare curious.
Yeah. And it's grown so much from its original form, where like no woman actually played a woman in the piece, Like we've seen it as people who have studied and observed it over time. We've seen it grow so much, so it only feels like an evolutionary step to be seeing it in more diverse, in more queering, in more trans lens, because our whole entire world is opening up its lens to that experience. Beautiful. Okay, I'm gonna move forward, as I still have Charlene for one more moment. So history and radical adaptations, this is where like our revivals and our reseeings of these come from. Our contemporary uses of rhizomatic, which is also like the sandwiching of language or the didactive language, or remixing it to approach Shakespeare, and treating the text not as something that's untouchable, but as like a place to grow and to explore. And this is a little bit where I came at it from for Rosalind and Juliet, because I not only decided to build a pre-world to Romeo and Juliet meeting, but I decided to also bring in Othello, and I decided to bring in a child of Aaron, that royal child of Aaron the Moor, and I wanted to see what happens when I put these people in this world together and still try to hold them to some of the things that they're navigating, and sneak in a little bit of my post-colonial or my contemporary perspective into it. And again, Shakespeare gave me the structure to do all of this, the pieces to do all of this. I actually didn't need it, but I took the freedom to push them all together and to start to validate things that as I started with. I did not love Shakespeare when I started working on this piece, and I would probably still not say like, I love Shakespeare, but I really do understand that Shakespeare gave us so many different types of structures and so many ways to root a story in these very simple things that I can then pull from and start to make sense from my own desire, right? Like, no one probably cared what happened to Aaron's child from Titus Andronicus, and I was just like, that poor child, like what was made of their life? So I really think about that as like, specifically that child too, right? Like cultural capital, because of the royal lineage now that he has, because he's grown up with knowing both a side of his father's fury, his father's tenacity, and his mother's fury too, right? They were both two very furious people. Because he has that, like, what then does he get to bring to the table in these conversations? And so I made him a political power, obviously not like a leader, but a political power in Rome, because he plays the game just the way Othello does, just from different lenses, right? Othello doesn't have that immediate attachment to royalty, but this child of Erin does, and how would he move with that little bit of power? And so my question for Nissi, and then for everyone, so prepare your like answering muscles, wherever they come from. And Charlene too, if you have the time to answer, I would love to hear from you, is what is the like the cultural, the cultural capital of Shakespeare, and how do you see current theater redistributing it for Black, queer, and non-binary characters? Nissi.
Yeah, I think you said it. The cultural capital of Shakespeare is completely large, right? He literally gave us forms that we still create in. You mentioned like the history and the royalty and stuff, but he also gave us the comedies, which is where I think is where we see a lot of the Black, queer, non-binary capital being distributed, because those are a little bit looser, right? And also they don't end in all the deaths. So it's like, if we are dying in the real world, why would we want to submit ourselves to that? And I think there's a very specific societal role that the tragedies play. And so we see that a lot more for post-colonial interpretations and the radical adaptation. It's right, how do we actually form life through the tragical, tragedy landscape. I think for where we see things becoming queer is really in the comedies and with lovers, especially because there was already a lot of gender swapping happening in the comedies. So when we're like in As You Like It, or even Twelfth Night's the big one, where you're just like, oh no, Duke, you like a girl that's just like a man, and we all see it. It's okay. Just lean into it. So like those things, like what does it mean to make sure that, like, one, we're thinking about the performance of when it actually happened in the Elizabethan era, but also what are all the ways that they are like subversive, and in some ways in how today it would be considered perverse. It's actually like, let's celebrate this. And that's one of the ways that we actually see the power being redistributed. It's like, how do we actually make this a joyful, pleasurable thing to be reveling in these queer identities and these queer love stories? And the idea that how you have been told to act, the way that you have been made to be, like that rigidity actually can be broken in a very joyful way.
Yes, thank you, thank you. I'm like, oh, sorry, participants, your thoughts. And I can make it even smaller, like what are some of the cultural capitals that you recognize in Shakespeare when you're going to see a piece and you're like, oh, that's just a part of what they do in a Shakespeare world, versus, I guess, what you would say when you go see like an August Wilson piece, right? Or I'm like, who's another famous playwright? Why am I forgetting? Arthur Miller, right? That's a famous one. Everyone knows Death of a Salesman. Great. So like, yeah, what is something that's specific to that world that you see, or what do you see, what do you think about when those sort of changes happen? When you see a Black Romeo or Black Juliet, what are some of the things that you start to think more about from their families or from their lineage or the society around them? And this is a question for folks in the Zoom too. If you want to speak, just drop your name in the chat and I'll call on you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Will you define or give more specific examples of what you mean by cultural capital?
Yes. So what I mean by cultural capital, oh, great. So I'll go back to that other thought, which is like the Capulets and the Montague are constantly fighting in the streets. If you were a peasant person fighting in the streets, they would have sent you out to jail. They would have banished you. You know, they would have immediately ended it. They would have taken you to your whatever they do cell version, right? But because of the status or the cultural capital of what royalty is allowed to get away with in that world, the Capulets and the Montagues fight and they fight and they fight until someone bleeds, and then they're like, Romeo needs to be banished. Doesn't even have to be punished, just like get him out of here now. It's too much. So it's like the cultural capital of royalty, or you have the cultural capital of the military, right? Othello's got a nice military stance, and so he has this power that he moves through space with that makes him feel a little untouchable, which is the thing that ignites Iago's anger, right? Is that you think you could be with this woman, like why should you have that ability to do that just because you've won a few battles?
I also think cultural capital is also the currency that you can play. So it's like it lets us not only think about like the economy of things or like how much money you can possess, but actually as in terms of like trading or in terms of what it means to be around other people. Like I not only am I untouchable, but I have influence. So it's how much influence you have that's not related to like a tangible thing, but how you appear in society. And I think that is both inside the world of the play and also on the outside, because we are so far removed from Shakespeare right now, but he is someone who is unquestionable. Like the influence of Shakespeare is larger than I would say any of the other playwrights that you've named.
Yeah, that's why I couldn't remember their names. Sil, you can correct me and when you come on.
It is Sil. Hello. Who was I gonna say? Oh, this is making me think of I recently stage managed a production of The Alchemist, and that is a show. I know it's not Shakespeare, but is one where I definitely felt moments of like, oh, there's no way these people could pull this off if X circumstance had been different, if they were Black, if they were femme, what have you. We did do a bit of gender bending. Some characters were acknowledged in that gender bending and some were not, which also is like an interesting play at the situation, because it feels sort of like an invitation for the audience to suspend their disbelief like that extra little bit. And yeah, it's really interesting to see some of these dynamics at play. Like, also, I think Shakespeare and some similar playwrights of that time really love a scammer and like love trickery, and that is also really interesting to see through a lens of, or what I was always seeing it through, like, oh, if this character looked like this or spoke like this, would they be able to get away with this? Like, would their scam have to be different? Like, what would change if their life was different?
Yeah. Thoughts, ideas, comments?
I love talking to directors because the vision is there, so it's so exciting to me. But so can I put that question back to you? Like, are there characters that you cannot do this with? That you're like, because like Devin the Salesman would be challenging. I mean, it might be challenging. And I've seen plays, American plays, in Nairobi, and Peer Gynt in other languages, and it works somehow because you're there. But here in the United States, listening to Shakespeare, the shows, these plays, they lend themselves. Are there plays where you're like, no? I mean, that's sort of an anecdotal entertaining to me, like, because the power characters, they can be really all beautifully, but are there ones that you're like, no? It just doesn't float. I think that's an interesting thing about Shakespeare.
It's a good question. I want to say that Will Smith did that whole like I gotta sell my medical machine thing movie that was basically Death of a Salesman. Yeah. So it's like weird, but that happened in a weird way. But are there characters that I say could not change? As a director, if I believe that the story that I'm trying to tell, if Titus Andronicus happened and everyone was a Black person, I think I think I'd need a new reason for them to not want Aaron to make a baby. I don't think it's a no, or not to make a baby, because he also does a lot of sneaky, conniving things, but the thing that takes them over is that he has the audacity to make a royal child, in my feeling of it. I think it really has to do with my visioning, in the vision that I want to tell, and the story that I want to tell. If the story that I want to tell is about colorism, I think I can make an all-black cast, or I can switch up some of the roles and see how that moves. But it's deeply about the story that I'm trying to tell, which is why I'm like, Shakespeare at itself gave us thematic anchors that we can work from and tell the kind of story that we want to tell with it. But if your directorial processing or the vision that you're having does not take into account the fact that you've changed genders, you have shifted races, then I feel like you haven't done the work. Maybe that's the easiest way to say it. Nisi, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's this thing that we think about a lot with reimagining and adaptations, and which absolutely includes like the stories that directors are telling. And that's one of my favorite things to do as a dramaturg, is to be like the researcher for a new reimagining, because it really is a question of how can you betray the text to like your own means. And so that really means you have to have a strong core, very strong storytelling like acumen to be like, this is what I'm going to carry forward. But like, I actually do think there are some things that are impossible if you are not clear. Like a Tempest with like a black Prospero and a white Caliban and Ariel, that's probably not going to work. Like that's probably a little, unless we completely upend the world, which I think it may be just too much work for like a 2.5 hour play, 2 hour play. That may be too much for our imagination because it so diverges from our world. But I do think like that is such a malleable question, because some things may be impossible within a text, but not everything. And it really depends on the frame that you're creating. And like that's really how I think it's most useful for me and my collaborators when reviewing Shakespeare. What is the frame and how are we working within that container?
Yes, thank you. Beautifully said, beautifully said. Any more thoughts? Participants in any plane realm around this, because I have more questions. I feel like thinking about a Tempest and switching those roles that way, I feel like that could be, like, my directorial brain is like, I could see how I make it work, right? It's essentially like the Jay-Z Rockefeller Center and they have a white receptionist, you know, like I can see how I make it work, but I have to be really intentional about it, right? Because there is this dialogue that's happening in our current America that is like, there are so many rich black people and so many poor white people in some weird conversation that's being had. And so I could see if we wanted to play that world, like if we wanted people to really see what that world looks like, to portray it in that way. But it's not easy, it's not nice, it's not a clean bow switch. I have to do a lot of work scene by scene by scene by scene, moment by moment by moment. Because that one is really, it's like built in, the racial dynamic is built into that. The master-slave dynamic is built into that space.
Yeah, like the question of the slave always messes up the Tempest, right? Because that is so specific, especially if we're adapting within the US. That is so specific to Black bodies.
Yes, yes. Okay, we're gonna move on to our last set of questions. These are 3 questions. They're related to the text that I put on your chairs. And folks, I will figure out how to drop these texts in the chat, because that was the part that I did not think ahead of time. But we are looking at the example of Shakespeare, and I put 2 in front of you because I couldn't decide. I put Othello's useless scene and the legacy of Caliban. We've been talking a lot about Tempest and this master-slave dynamic. So maybe you want to look at Othello's useless scene, which talks about how we spend so much time. Okay, the top of it says, it looks like this one. If you don't have, it's totally okay. Let me try to put this in the chat. Yeah, I think I can do it. Yes, come grab it. Come grab it if you want it. Yay, okay. I'm gonna put the whole book in the chat. Nisi, is it okay? Okay.
I'm not going to stop you.
Thank you. Knowledge is power, and everyone deserves power and knowledge. So when you open the PDF, we're looking at page 97 to center this conversation. It starts off with, does anybody want to read? I'm happy to read, but I love hearing other people speak. Page 97 of the book, Othello's useless scene. Othello has 15 scenes, 3 in the first act, another 3 in the second, 4 in the third, and further 3 in the fourth, and finally 2 scenes in the fifth act. Of these, the one opening the fourth act is running to line 211, that is up until when the trumpet sounds in Lodovico's from Venice, is the scene with the flaw of repetition. And so the thought of like the more that we repeat something, the less we actually kind of understand it. So to have a piece in play, this scene ought in fact begin with the stage direction, enter Lodovico, Desdemona, and attendants. All that is new in the play follows upon this announcement, namely the recall of Othello to Venice, his replacement by Cassio as the general officer commanding in Cyprus, and his striking of Desdemona. I am commanded home. Cassio shall have my place. The general mumbles aloud as he reads the dispatch. These are 2 of the items new that for him prove the last straw. They feed his fury, being the actual worries now at work in his mind, coming on top of Desdemona's ill-timed, impudent plea on behalf of the man he already suspects her with. They may very well account for why Othello strikes her. Is it his use, or did the letter work upon his blood and new create this fault? Lodovico's query underlines the point, the tragic change in the hero. And when Iago offers the information that he is much changed, we know for a fact that this has been accomplished long before scene 3, act 3. That is in the so-called corruption scene. So our thought is, why? Why do we keep going? We've seen this corruption. Why does this keep happening? And so my question to everyone is, after we think about these sort of defects of Othello, the script of it, the facts that we're getting these information over and over, and we're doubling down. And we're not just doubling down on Iago as icky, we're doubling down on the viciousness and the overtime griminess of Othello. And so thinking about that, do you believe it's actually like more liberating for a modern adaptation to continue to dive deeper and deeper and deeper into the dehumanizing or the animalizing of Othello? Or do you, I feel like I've already made this question too complex. I'm gonna make it a little, just because it was like, oh yeah, you're rambling about it. When you think about how sometimes in Shakespeare there are moments that are further jabbing an idea into you, when you think about that some of these ideas are making someone an animal or dehumanizing them, when you see a modern adaptation of it, does it make you feel, when you saw the modern, or if we're thinking of the modern Black woman as Julius Caesar, do we feel more empathy for her, for Julius Caesar now because it's a Black woman? Or do we feel like in this interpretation or adaptation of it, do we feel like, yes, because in this adaptation of it, we have more empathy because it's a woman, and not just because it's a woman, because it's a Black woman that then gets murdered by at least 12 white men on stage? Is that succinct enough? I'd be worrying. Bob, and then feel free to just raise your hand if you want to say.
My first reaction when you asked the question is that I think that in this context, it's actually inviting Shakespeare to tell another story.
Agreed. I agree. Or maybe not Shakespeare to tell another story. I think what makes Shakespeare, again, we're hitting on a really deep or a part of this, is that he has given us a blueprint or a theme that we then can tell a different type of story with.
So I'll admit I'm not super familiar with most Shakespeare after high school, or college maybe, but it's been a little bit. With this specific scene, are you saying that like, just this scene is like, they're sort of making it though, like it's been established that like he is thought of as being kind of an animal or less than, and this scene is just kind of like beating a dead horse?
I mean, he literally slaps the woman that he's been saying this whole play that he loves, he slaps her in this moment in front of everyone. And then inevitably murders her. But, you know, like, why do we need to see that if we've already, you know, decided that he is vicious?
So I guess my question is like, why do you think it was originally there? Was it just sort of like everybody thought this and it was kind of just careless and ignorance at the time, or just whatever it was, where it was sort of like, we just, you know, Shakespeare likes to be a little long-winded sometimes, so why not have this to like wax poetic about a little bit longer? So I guess sort of like, what do you think the purpose was originally? And then in terms of like, I really work like with some of this stuff, like when Missy was saying like the reason we do the comedies and not the tragedies is because like we see all of this like death happening in the world, the white culture. Like I feel like it would sort of be like, can you keep going with it or like perpetuated it? So then my second question then becomes like, I have seen some adaptations and I don't know enough of the originals to be like, I see what they changed. Like they changed language. Can you change the lines? Are you just changing the scenery? Like how much do you change so that that scene could exist in a new way? How much can you just take it out and be like, this is bullshit? How much do you leave it in and are like, we want you to see how bullshit it was by leaving it in its fullness? Like what are the options for you?
Okay.
And I'm sorry I missed the beginning if you were like, we went over all of this.
No. This is all food for thought and conversation fodder. And Nisi, I put it in the chat so that you could also answer if you want. I put the first part of the question in the chat. The second part of the question is, I guess I'm going to answer it so that I'm going to answer before I forget my answer, which is the center at Rhinebeck just did Othello, and they had their Othello as a black woman, and they kept every scene still. Every single one of them. And because Shakespeare is open domain, you can change lines. The people who are actually typically holding you by the throat are the people who are diehard Shakespearean fans. Because you can change and adjust however you want because it's an open domain. It's not like under a copyright, really. But the idea that people have of Shakespeare is so strong that it's hard when you do those sort of things. If you just do it as a one-off, you really need to be deeply intentional about those kinds of shifts. So, yes, did I answer that second part, which was, do people just change lines or do they feel like it was like beating the horse in the modern world? Some people do, some people don't. And then the first part of the first part of the question, and then I'll open it up to other folks, are what do I think the purpose of that is, the purpose of leaving these scenes in. And if you keep reading, John Clark does go on to explain what he believes the purpose of it is, but I believe the purpose of it is what I was saying, which is to further dehumanize this character. Because in the beginning, even though he's cold, even though I believe Othello is very like, I call him like rigid to the system. He believes in it. He follows it. He thinks that that's the thing that's gonna elevate him and protect him in the world. And it actually comes back to be the thing that destroys him, his belief and his loyalty. So I think the purpose of it is to further dehumanize him so that when we see his death, we don't feel as much sympathy as we could for a man that's actually been like tormented, lied to, people have snuck around and had all of these different plots out against his life. If a lot of people, I leave every time I see Othello, like, I just hate Iago. Like, I just can't believe that he's allowed to do everything that he's allowed to do. But not everybody leaves that way. A lot of people leave because of the further deepening, hammering, revenge, the off-kilter that he keeps going on, scene after scene after scene on this militia. They're like, yeah, he deserves that. He deserves that. And it allows us as the audience, when we leave, to have a conversation where someone's like, he deserved that. And I'm like, no, he literally was like manipulated into this, to see that at the root of this, it's like, where was the human compassion for him from the people around him? And where is the compassion for Iago, in that he was someone so hurt that he felt, and so thinking about that cultural capital, right? So strong in his belief that he deserved what Othello had, and that he was shorted because Othello had it, and not that he could also have it. The tragedy of both of those. Instead, we as audience sometimes are picking a side. And the fact that we have lost so much of the original Othello that we saw that was madly in love, it's easier to do that.
I think Shakespeare plays a lot with the dialectic and having, presenting two sides of an issue, and even in monologues, somebody is debating with themselves about whether something's the right action. So when he's repeating this with Othello and really beating up, it plays on our sympathy, I think, somewhat. And then with the aspect in the earlier question about what happens when you when you swap out the gender or the skin color of an actor, again, it's calling our attention to their humanity in another way, and reopening that question again, of like, and especially with your example on the Julius Caesar thing, of like, exactly, of like, well, how much sympathy, how does it change our sympathy, and how does it change the weight that we give to each of these things, more so in the Othello thing that we're talking about, where it works because if Iago is absolutely horrible, then it becomes just a boring progression to the end of this thing. But if there's a little bit of, sort of, if it's going to the middle, then it's much more interesting. It opens up some other questions.
Yeah. Nisi, and then, I didn't get your name. Helen. Nisi, and then Helen.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interpersonal things that come up with that scene, but I also think it's very structural. Like I saw uh, OSF last season did an all women and femme production of Julius Caesar. And one of the things that you're really left with is just how misogynistic the world is, right? Like there's actually no question about it, because all we're seeing is women play out what society wants them to do. And so that is something I think about with Othello when we get to that scene is Syl said before about the scammers. Like there's a lot of people playing tricks, and like one of the things that happen is by the end we see who actually does not align, right? Like everything always comes to the light. And one of the things that we're seeing that is, even though Othello plays by all the rules and he so believes that he can be a leader in this world, we are seeing that not even that saves him, right? Like he actually will never be able to align with the powers at be. And Iago makes sure of that, but that will always be what comes to pass. And so I don't even think it's only the dehumanization that happens with that scene. I think within the context of the world, it is he will never ascend to king. Like that is not possible. And here's specifically why. It's not like after all of this, he can still be brought down for you to know he ain't it. Period. And that is something that we have to live with. And that is something that happens, I think, across Shakespeare's work, is that we are absolutely meant to see how immovable some social positioning is. And one of the things that it does when we do it today is that, one, it can either highlight how we've been placed into those boxes. So that could be a form of liberation if you're trying to prove to folks, like within an inch of your life, that you have in fact done this to me. Like I am only in this position because of your thought, because of the pleasures of your mind and your being and theories and all of that. Like it's your colonizer mind that made me so. Or the other is, I can break out of this frame because I am so aware of the positioning that I'm playing in this world.
Absolutely. Helen? Thank you, Nisi.
I was just sort of curious what if there are adaptations that have excised or significantly adapted that scene, and were they within the context of the rest of the play being fairly traditionally presented? Like how have we seen? I haven't seen any escaping, so I'm curious about how directors and playwrights are grappling with this specific.
Right. I don't think I've seen a version where they have extracted or changed these scenes. Has anyone in the room, in either of their rooms? So that goes to say, like, even though this is a feeling of, like, again, beating a dead horse, poor phrasing, but conceptual idea, people still keep it. People still keep going with the same original text. They still keep going with these same original ideas. Okay, we are at our time together. Are there any last thoughts, questions while I have Nisi still here before they go be an awesome educators and teach some little kids how to do theater? And you all in this room with me while we're in the library. Yes.
Hi, SJ.
Hi, SJ.
Chair for OutHudson. So I'm sorry I got here late.
That's okay.
I had something else, but I was really, this has been so intriguing, and I keep thinking about like Romeo and Juliet and, Jane and Juliet. And I haven't seen any productions of where Shakespeare has been adapted. I did read about a West Side Story that got shifted around somewhere. Probably Mrs. Google knows about that. But anyway, thank you.
Did you say Mrs. Google?
Yes.
All right, Mrs. Google.
But thank you so much for your time and today and sharing with everybody who was able to come. And it's just, I grew up in the South, and I wondered from day one, full disclosure, why my Bible had a picture of Jesus. I'm not religious anymore, so I'm not stepping on anybody's toes, but was such a blue-eyed guy because I knew geography.
Right.
It confused me. I mean, and I'm older. I mean, that was back then. And I remember saying, what's up with this? And the adults in my life basically said, we'll talk about this later. And we did, and everyone agreed ultimately. But it's overdue, all of it. And, we're all allies, in my opinion. And so thank you.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I grew up with a black Jesus, and I grew up in a black church, First Baptist and Methodist, and on the side I played with a little bit of naturalism, and so when I saw white Jesus, I was just like, oh, why'd they do that to him? But what I want to also attach this thought to is like, we are raising a new generation of youth, of people who are learning about classics and canons and theater, and what if they never saw an all-white version of Romeo and Juliet?
Exactly.
What if they never had to think about what it meant to be pigeoned out, to be pushed out of a lens, right? Because great, it's totally cool that it exists, but now let's play with the fact that there are way more visions that we can have of it, of those type of relationships, of the people who can be in those bodies and in those positions, as opposed to the surprise, and also as opposed to the side conversation of like, oh, this was a one-off, like you would never see this again. It's like, oh no, this is just what an adaptation is. People be modifying characters to tell really rich stories. Nisi, did you want to say anything before we close out?
No, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for joining me. Thank you all for joining me.